Hello, my name's Jim Friend, and in this tutorial we're going to be making this 3D animated line art using the free version of Cinema 4D Lite that comes with After Effects. Hey guys, we're going to start in Cinema 4D and then bring it back into After Effects to do some compositing of glows and things like that. So let's start by jumping up to File, New, Maxon Cinema 4D file. That'll ask you to save it, and it will launch Cinema 4D Lite. So let's set up our scene. Go to the render settings, this little cog icon, and we're going to change this to film and video HD TV 1080. And that's 25 frames, so we need to change 25 frames down in our project settings. If you don't see this, Control or Command D. Now I'm going to start by tracing a image I found on the web. Obviously you can draw your own images, but thought this might be easier for demonstration. So I'm going to go up to this corner, right hand corner, and click this little box. That's going to break our view into the 4-up view, top, front and right. We actually want to be in this front view, and we can expand the front view by going up to the right hand corner of that view. And now we're kind of looking almost like we're in After Effects. You know, this is a 2D platform, so we can draw really easily on here. And we can actually load in an image to our background that we can then trace. So if you go up to Options and go down to Configure, that'll open a new panel on this right hand side. And you can say Back, go to the Back tab there, and it says Image. We can just select an image. I've got this light bulb I'm going to use, and I'm just going to scale that down a little bit, probably something like this. And you can also just change the transparency here, so you can kind of it not be so prominent, so we can kind of see where we're drawing. Okay, great. So now I'm going to trace this image with the spline pen. We can go up here to this little pen tool, and you can kind of think of this as the path tool in After Effects. And to navigate around our scene, we can hold 1 on the keyboard and click and drag. That pans us, and then we can press 2 on the keyboard and click and drag, and that zooms us in. So that's how we can navigate through this section of the tutorial. And if you are new to Cinema 4D and want to get comfortable with the basics, I've got a free tutorial over on my website. There's a link in the description below. That covers kind of navigation and moving objects and just really gets you comfortable with the basics. Alright, so I'm going to trace this now. I'm going to start over here. So it's just clicking and dragging to get our Bezier handles, and just roughly sketching this out. Something like this. Now I'm not going to bore you with showing you all of the whole tracing process, so I'll probably skip this section. Okay, so that's roughly sketched out. So we're going to jump back to our 4-up view, clicking the top right hand corner, and going back to our perspective view, clicking the top right hand corner of that box. And you can see there, now it's in 3D space, but we've drawn it just on a kind of 2D plane. So something to note is that splines don't actually render out. So if I hit the render play button, we're not going to see anything. So we need to add some geometry to this spline. So we're going to do that by coming up to our generator objects. It's this kind of hollow box, and we're looking for a sweep, and we can put that spline as a child of the sweep. We won't see anything yet because the sweep needs the spline as well as the shape that it's going to sweep down that spline. So if we go up to our spline, that same pen tool, but click and hold this time, and we can pick a circle and make that a child of the sweep as well. you see we get this big mess. That's because this circle is massive at the moment. So all we need to do is shrink that down. We can do that in our attributes tab here on the radius. And something like that maybe. It's also useful to change this from uniform to subdivided. That just smooths out some of those points. So let's have a look at this light bulb that we've drawn. To navigate, I'm using the 1, 2 and 3 keys. 1 to pan, 2 to zoom, 3 to orbit, and just clicking on the mouse. You can also use these tools up here, but they're not as useful. So as we can see, we've drawn this on just one axis, and obviously in 3D we can make use of all the axes. So I think next I want to kind of pull out some of these points and make them a bit more 3D. To do that, I'm going to head on up to our 4-up view again. So a few things to note when we're trying to move points on a spline. We want to have the spline we want to move selected, so not the circle, the actual spline. We want to be in point mode, this little box with 2 dots on it, and we want the move tool selected. That way we can select a point and we can kind of move it out. I'm jumping up to our top view here, and you can see we can have quite a lot of control kind of moving these points around, spacing them out. And we can even click the kind of Bezier handles to reposition them like this. As we can see here in our perspective view, this is intersecting with each other, so we definitely want to pull kind of one away from the other one, just so we don't get any of that crossover. And I'm just kind of jumping from the front view to the top view to do this. It's probably the easiest way. And just constraining everything on the axes, so you know, if you try and kind of move this like this, it will go all over the place, as well as trying to move it actually in the perspective view. You don't get a really a good idea of where you're moving it. So moving from the front view to the top view, and even the right view here, you can see is useful for us. So just selecting some of these points, pulling them out. And you can even tweak the Bezier handles to just make them a little smoother. Just going to skip through this section quickly. Hey guys, I realised I skipped over the section where I talked about extending the timeline. All you have to do is come down to these frames down here, extend it to whatever you want, and then you can drag the preview range out. Once you save this, that layer will update over in After Effects. Okay, back to the tutorial. Okay, so that's our light bulb there. As you can see, kind of just moved certain sections out of the way of each other just so we get a kind of continuous line with no crossover or intersections there. So some of you might want to just animate it as it is with no camera move. So I'm going to go back to our perspective view here. Going to just frame it up something like this. And it's super easy to animate this sweep. Just go to the sweep generator, and in the attributes you're looking for end growth. And as you can see, that kind of draws the sweep on and off. So to keyframe this, jump to our end point, add a keyframe there, and then jump to, you know, the end maybe, and putting the end growth up to 100 and adding a keyframe there, and then playing that back. Always remember to save. To see updates in After Effects, Control S or Command S. And jumping back over to After Effects, we can just drop that Cinema 4D file into a composition. That'll open it up. We're seeing this through a draft renderer at the moment, but we can change that to current on our renderer and do a RAM preview. And you can render this out just like any other animation in After Effects. Of course, this doesn't really take full advantage of the 3D aspect. So next I want to show you putting a camera inside our scene and tracking the line with the camera. So for that, I'm going to jump back over to Cinema 4D. And I'm going to get rid of these keyframes down in our timeline, clicking, deleting, or you can go to this end growth, animation, delete track. So let's take that end growth up to 100 so the whole thing is drawn in. And then with our 1, 2 and 3 keys, I'm just going to kind of frame this up so we can see our entire animation. I've just done a little loop here at the beginning as well, just as another little bit of interest. And what we want to do is have a camera kind of tracking along the side of this path. So that's actually quite straightforward. If we go back up to our 4-up view and we can kind of look at this from the top, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit using our 2 key and 1 key to reposition. So you can see this is our path of our spline, and we want a camera to kind of just arc round while it's looking at that spline drawing on. We could actually utilize something called a line to spline, where we can draw a spline and have the camera move along that. So let's draw our camera path with our spline. I'm going to draw with Bezier handles something like this. Maybe just wrap that all the way around. Pressing escape on the keyboard to stop drawing. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is bring in a camera, and let's make sure we're clicked onto the perspective view when we bring in a camera. Just this little camera icon here, click once. If we're actually on a top view selected and we bring in a camera, it might be just facing directly down, so we make sure we're on perspective view. And then with that camera selected, we want to go right click, animation tags, align to spline, and with that highlighted we can see it brings up spline path. We can throw that camera path that we made, let's actually rename that cam spline, and you can see it automatically puts our camera right at the beginning of that spline. If we highlight the align to spline icon, we can change the position there, and we can see our camera is moving along that spline, which is really useful. Then of course we need to make sure the camera is looking in the right direction, so I'm going to create a null, just like an After Effects null, and we're going to create a target tag. So on the camera, I'm going to right click again, animation tags and target, and then the object is going to be that null that we just made, so throw that in there. And now when we move the align to spline position, we can see the camera is always looking at that null, meaning, you know, when we want to face it in different directions, all we have to do is change the position of the null. If we come up to our camera in our objects tab and click this little box so we can see through the camera, and just go to the align to spline icon and move the position there, and you can see in our perspective view this is working really well now. So I'm going to take that back to 0, that position on the align to spline. And just to note, we've got kind of 3 things moving here. We're going to have the camera moving along the spline, its kind of track. We're going to have the spline animating on as it draws our path. And we're also going to animate the target null so it's looking at the right point that's being drawn on. So it's really a bit of a balancing act of kind of how to time out this animation and just kind of be patient with it. It can be a bit frustrating trying to get those timings right. I would suggest trying to kind of imagine how long you want this animation to be, and using the camera as the kind of first thing that we time out. So going back to the position on the line to spline, hitting a position keyframe there at 0 and taking it to about 250, and taking that position all the way to the end, so the camera's tracked all the way to the end, and just playing back and kind of trying to imagine in your head this animation playing out before we actually start animating things. Now you might have noticed there that there is some easing going on either side of this. We can change that just by highlighting these two keyframes and going up to our attributes and changing this from spline to linear. Now the camera will move in a linear way. So I'm just looking at this perspective view and kind of imagining the line being drawn on. So it's up the loop, through the loop, it's now drawing on the light bulb. That looks roughly the right kind of timing for me. So next I think I want to animate the camera null, so the camera's looking in the right place as we move through this animation. And I'm going to start with kind of the middle where we know our light bulb's going to be drawn on. I think it should be kind of starting to draw on around here, so like 120. Going to set some keyframes there for the null because this is the right position, and it'll probably carry on drawing the light bulb until about here, where it will finish and then fly by, and we want our null to kind of push the camera around. So let's set some more keyframes there on X, Y and Z, although it's probably just the X axis we need. Then I'm going to drag our playhead back to the beginning and actually move the null in this top view, just shifting it along a little bit, maybe moving it down slightly here. So it's kind of looking at the beginning of our spline path, something like that. Going to add some more keyframes in the coordinates of that camera null just by clicking. Make sure we're clicked on our perspective view. You'll see we get this kind of tracking, and then it's stopping at the light bulb, and then it needs to swing by. So let's do that end move, and I think probably around here the null can kind of swing past. Going back to my top view to animate that null, adding a keyframe there. So let's have a look at that now. We get something like this. Remember clicking our perspective view to see that animation play out, or else it'll play out in your top view. So now let's look at that animation play out. Through the loop, draws on our light bulb and then kind of whips away. So let's get our spline actually drawing on, and this is kind of, look, it's kind of hard to see at the moment, so I'm just going to add a material by double clicking down here in this empty space, which is our materials manager, going up to the kind of red and just choosing a red for now, throwing that on our sweep, and that just makes it a little bit clearer to see. So let's animate this sweep drawing on, and as I said before, we're going to go to our sweep attributes object tab, and it's actually this end growth we want to animate, so taking that all the way back to 0 and 0 on our timeline, adding a keyframe just by hitting that little button, going to the end, probably somewhere around here, and taking that end growth to 100, adding a keyframe again, and we can play that back. And in our perspective view, you can start to see we're getting close to what we want. So to edit those animation paths, we're going to go up to Window. We're going to go to Timeline Dope Sheet. So as you can see here, we've got our sweep. So that's actually the line drawing on our sweep. Then we've got our camera null. This is where our camera is looking at. And then we've got the align to spline, which is our camera position along that spline. So you can use the 1 and 2 keys to zoom out in this timeline. And now it's really about just fiddling with these until you're happy with how the animation looks. So I'm going to go back to the start, play that back. we want this spline to draw on a bit faster at this point. So I'm just going to make sure the end growth is selected there, and we just need to move these points up a little bit like that. And now the camera kind of follows that line off. So then we get this going back. Oh, I've moved some points here, just bringing them back to 0. See what we've got now. Loop the loop and light bulb, and it kind of swooshes off. So remember to save that to see updates in After Effects. So we can go File, Save Project, and then we can jump back to After Effects and see that updated. We did extend the Cinema 4D project a little bit, so we have to do the same here. So if we go into our composition settings, and we're just going to extend this time, duration, and then we can extend that clip, and then we'll see the whole animation. So there we can see the whole animation. Now, last thing I'm going to show you is just how to get a little bit of a glow on this, and I did this on my example by setting up a material in Cinema 4D and then doing a bit of compositing in After Effects, which I'll kind of brush over because this is mainly just about this line drawing. Okay, so back to Cinema, and let's get a new material. Double click in the Materials Manager and then double click that material to get the material editor up. We're going to get rid of colour, we're going to get rid of reflectance, and we're just going to work in the luminance. And what I want to do is add a texture, and that texture to be a noise. And you can see it kind of gives this kind of black and white shading. And if we jump to our perspective view and kind of scrub along the timeline a little bit, and I throw this material over the top of the red one, so it overwrites it, you can start to see there's some different shading there. So obviously we don't want black and white, so I had a kind of blue colour here. I'm just going to pick roughly similar colour to that, something like this, and I'm going to copy that colour. I'm going to paste it into the second colour. Just right clicking to paste and double click on that colour and just lighten this up a little bit, something like that. And then we can increase the global scale maybe to 1000. And all this is doing is just giving a bit of variation along the line. It's very subtle. I mean, you can obviously make it less subtle by cranking these up. Now you can see there's some kind of more obvious differences along the path. But that's a starting place in Cinema 4D, and we can close that, save it to see changes in After Effects, jump back to After Effects, and then all I did was duplicated this Cinema 4D layer. Then I just made a glow from a levels effect, and then I blurred that level effect. Let me just jump back here a little bit so you can see it kind of glowing here. I'm not sure you'll be able to see that fully with the kind of compression within YouTube, but just put a levels effect and then a fast box blur and then a hue and saturation, and you can kind of use the blur radius to affect the radius of the glow. And then I duplicated that one more time and just did a slightly bigger radius this time. And then I just played around with the opacity of both of those layers, just kind of tweaking something like that. And then for a background, all I did was add a solid. Then I used the 4-color gradient, made these all blue. And that's the final result. Obviously you can jump back to the render settings under these and change them to viewport draft if your computer's being a bit slow. And another point is just for the glow, if you're not really seeing a decent glow, make sure you can change your bit per channels up to 16 or 32. Well, I hope that was useful. If it was, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe. Really helps the channel when making new videos. And if you're just getting started with 3D and want to start learning the basics, I've got a free course over on my website. There's a link in the description below. And here are some other videos that you might like.